I left off with, "Whoa, whoa," and my brain finally processed, "Fire!" Here I am standing on a barge on a dry dock with 2 pallets, which is 4 55-gallon drums of full or partially full cans of flammable paint thinner, along with at least 2 pallets of these 7-gallon cans of this paint, which is also flammable. Of course, it has to be exposed to the flames. It doesn't have the fumes that the paint thinner does. But regardless of all that, here I am standing with all this stuff, and it's dark. It's nighttime. Even though there were lights on, it wasn't what you would call bright or super well lit. It was enough to work by. I peeled my mask back enough to see what was up. Nobody in front of me. I turned to my right, like I said, and what do I see? I see an orange billowing black mass coming up where the main walkway is, which was the only walkway that would take you off to the main dock. So now I'm standing there thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do? This isn't a good situation. I could die. I don't know if I thought about the fact that I could die. I know I realized it was a dangerous situation. Time goes by and I tell the story. Looking back on things at this end of my life, I can see low points in my life, things that I wish hadn't happened. As I look back, I realize that if they hadn't happened, that I wouldn't be where I am. And that means that my family wouldn't be where it is. But everything works out if we trust in God to deal with it. And as I tell this story and I share some of the things that happened in my life, had those things not happened in certain pattern sequences, then so realizing that my easy off is in the flames, I decided that I should go the next best route and run up onto the top of the opposite edge of the dry dock and go to the end where there were ladders, or there's supposed to be ladders. So there was a ramp going up, and so I run over. Now, mind you, I had to disconnect my airline hose. I yanked my respirator off, threw it down, because it wasn't going to do me any good that I could see, because I couldn't run with it on. I couldn't see with it on. And so I yank it off, and I run the 20 yards or so to where the ramp is. And the ramp was going up onto the upper ledge of the dry dock on the opposite side from where the flames were. And so as I get to the base of that, I look back over my left shoulder and I can see this, again, billowing mass of orange flame. And I realize that it's not a good situation to be in. And I'd like to get out of it if I possibly could. So I start running up this ramp. Now, as I start to run up the ramp, this is where the first time and the only time I really have a good recollection of it ever happening, I saw my life pass before me. I had a 13, 14-month-old son. I had a daughter that was a month old. I had and I saw my life, what there was of it, pass before me, and I said, God, I don't want to die right here, right now. And so I start running up the ramp. I get halfway up the ramp, and either the wind shifted or more stuff started burning, and all of a sudden this black billowy cloud mass just encircles and encompasses me. And of course I'm running, I'm breathing hard, and so not able to stop because I don't realize it's happening. I inhale a bunch of these fumes. Instantly I feel the effects of toxic burning fumes, and I stumble a little bit because it really hit hard, because instead of breathing oxygen, I'm breathing this poison. I got low, which wasn't going to help because the cloud is moving up on me. Tried to get a little bit of a breath and ran up the rest of the way of the ramp to the top, which was still in the smoke. I get to the top of the ramp. I still can't breathe without inhaling this toxic mixture of burning chemicals. I run to the left, which is the east side of the dock, which is the water side. And so I run out there, and I get to that point where the little chain is, that's a safety chain, so you can't accidentally walk off the end of the dry dock and fall down. So I get to that chain and I lean over and I'm trying to see the ladder. Well, by this time, the lights have all gone out. And so basically all we have is just ambient light from other places, other lights. The dock is no longer lit. Electricity line must have burned out or shorted out or something, I don't know. And I look over the edge and there's no ladder. I kneel down and I try to feel for a ladder. There's nothing there. So I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's no ladder here. I better go to the other end and get to see if there's a ladder. So the air has moved enough so that I'm in a little clear zone. And so I'm trying to catch some breath, breathe, because it's really hard. My chest is hurting. And so I take a few breaths, hold it, because I have to now run back through the cloud of smoke that's billowing by the ramp to go to the other end of this ramp or this ledge or walkway on top of this dry dock. And so I run the length of the dry dock. Well, I try to run. I'm not feeling good. Mostly I feel like I'm floating, but I get to the other end. There's a little more light on this side because this is on the dock side, the shipyard side, kind of like the city side. And so I get there, there's the chain. I lean over a little bit to see if I can find the ladder, and there's no ladder. What the heck happened to the ladder? I don't know. So about this time I figured, well, there's no ladder, maybe I should jump into the water. So I look over the edge and all I see is blackness. I don't know if there's a pontoon. I don't know if there's a floating boat. I don't know what's over the edge there. Maybe one of those big concrete pilings that they sometimes put up against dry docks to hold them. I don't know what's there. all I see is black, darkness. And my brain goes, well, that's a long way to jump and fall and land on something. Actually, it's just a long way to jump into the water when you're not used to it and you're already having trouble breathing. You're wearing this white jumpsuit that's taped at your feet over rubber galoshes or rubber boots, and I still had my rubber neoprene gloves on. So the little bit of cohesive thought I could get was probably not a good idea because you won't swim well. So now my option was to run back to the ramp that's in the smoke, run back down onto the dry dock and see if I can get off there. With that thought in mind, I try to take a few deep breaths. And again, I'm still having trouble breathing. My lungs are hurting and burning. And so I get some breath and I run back into the smoke, having to kind of run my hand along the chain rails that, you know, keep people from falling off the ledge of the dry dock. And I make it to where the opening is for the ramp. I can feel the edge handle of the ramp, and I run down on the ramp. And as I get to the bottom, the smoke clears, so I can at least see some, not well because the lights are out, but I can see from the light that's out there, ambient light, that where to kind of go. I can see still the billowing fumes of the billowing smoke, the fire sticking up through it, and it looks like it's spread, but I don't know. All I know is that I need to get away from where I am, because, you know, there's a lot of smoke, and if it shifts again, you know, I'll be in this cloud of smoke again, and it's not doing me any good. I start running to my left, which is the dock side of the dry dock and the barge. And I run there, and as I'm running, I meet up with another guy, and I can't even remember who. It was dark. I just met up with another guy, and we get over to the edge of the barge, past where the flames and the smoke are, and I'm standing there looking over the edge into more darkness. I can't see what's down there. I can't see what's along the edge of the dry dock going down, and there's all sorts of stuff that's attached to the dry dock. All I know is that if I jump, there's a good chance I'm going to hit my back or hit my body on this angled edge of the dry dock because it angles inward. I'm standing there, and as I'm standing there with this other fella, one of those whirly cranes is moving past on the dock, and that is the only good light that there is that's shining out of that crane, where it's shining towards its boom. And we look up and we can see the operator. The operator sees us, and he shouts, "You better get off before it blows up." Actually, he just said, "You better get off before it blows." Okay, maybe I should get off before it blows. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. And the other guy says, "I think I'm just going to jump over the edge over here." I thought, well, maybe I should just jump over the edge of the barge and down into the bottom of the dry dock section that's there and hope for the best. So I walk along a little bit further away from where the flames were, and I see there's some hoses that are stretched across. One of them looks like a substantial water hose, about a 3-inch water hose. And oftentimes they would run water in sprinklers inside of these barges to try to keep the rat population down, because the rats didn't really like the water that much. I figure, you know, if I grab this hose on my way down, and that'll help break my fall, and then I really only have to fall or jump maybe 12, 16 feet, and, you know, I should be able to do okay with that. I lean over and start to grab the hose and push myself off over the edge, and my body starts to roll over the edge. My hands are looped on this hose, and then the hose snaps. Obviously an old hose. Here I am, now with my body weight rolled over, no longer necessarily feet first, falling into this black abyss. And I wasn't able to get my feet down. I landed on the dry dock, I assume, because the impact knocked me out. How long it knocked me out for? Well, I really don't know, but it knocked me out. I finally come to, and here I am under this, basically under the edge of the barge, and there I'm sitting, or laying, whichever one you want to call it. And I know I have to move. I'm not thinking clearly, not thinking well at all. I force myself up on my hands and my knees, and I'm looking around, and I can see the orange black light at the other end of the barge where the fire had been. And at the other end of the barge, as I turn and look on the dock side, or, well, it's the dock side, it's the street side, I can see a little glimmer of light. I decided I better get up and run. So I stand up, and bam, I hit my head on the bottom of the barge because it wasn't quite 5 feet off the ground. It was blocked up on wood blocks, high enough so that someone could crouch and work underneath it. And that's what they did when they were painting, is they just were crouching and spraying and going back and forth. I get my composure back. My head's now hurting, spinning. I've hurt my back, obviously, when I fell. And so I'm having a hard time breathing. I'm still floating mentally. And so I crouch and I start running towards the dock end of the dry dock. And sure enough, at the end, there's a ramp that goes up onto the main dock. So I run up on the ramp, and I get back up onto the main dock, and I feel like I've made it. And I'm sort of running at a bear crawl. And so when I get up onto the pavement, you know, I'm stopping, I'm trying to catch my breath. I'm trying to get up enough, you know, nerve and strength and to move some more. And while I'm standing there, this worker comes up. He's an old guy. And I can remember looking up at him, and he starts telling me about all these fires they've had at the shipyard and all this history of fires. And it's like, oh, okay. I got to move now. And of course, he doesn't help me. He just keeps telling me stories. So I basically bear crawl over to across this dock, or the road that's on this dock, and I get to the other side. I get there, and I just sit down and lean up against a white picket fence that's been built there. So I'm sitting there. I have no idea what time it is. I have no idea how long it's been. I do notice that there's sirens in the distance, and I can see flashing lights come in my direction. So I'm leaning there, and one of the quartermen had come over from the paint shed or the paint shop, and he comes up to me and goes, "What happened? What happened?" Like the heck I know what happened. I was mixing paint. There was a fire. That's what I know. I said, "I'm having a hard time breathing." And I fell and I hurt my back and I banged my head. "Well, you better go to the health office." Okay. So he goes walking off. Well, he told me I needed to go to the health office. What next? I better get moving. So I muster up strength and energy, and I start walking to the direction of where the health center was. And of course, by this time, there's fire engines lining up in front of me and hooking up hoses and getting ready to fight the fire. And, more and more of these fire engines are coming in. And what had happened, and that's why I put the Vincent Thomas Bridge in there, a fire engine was coming back from a false alarm, and saw the flames and immediately called it in. And I guess it was like a 3-alarm fire, major fire, whatever they call. And so they had gear coming in from everywhere. And so here I am walking along the side of this roadway to the health office with all of these emergency vehicles lining up and backing up and getting stuck. And of course, I'm not even thinking that maybe I could ask them for some help. No, I'm thinking I need to get to the health center. So finally I make it to the health center. I go in. The woman looks at me and I'm all covered with black soot, head to toe. My hood's been ripped off my head or pulled back that I had on. I had a painter's hood. And somewhere along the line, I'd gotten rid of my gloves. I still have this white outfit on. And so she brings me in and helps me get out of the smoky, soot-covered white painter's suit and to get the boots off that I had on. And I lay down, and she gives me a little bit of oxygen to breathe, and she goes and she tries to get a hold of a doctor to see what they want to do. Well, long story short, I was there for maybe an hour. Finally, a doctor said, "Well, you better send him to the emergency room." And so when I heard that, I thought, "Oh, I'm going to the emergency room. Oh, good, I get a ride in an ambulance." Ambulance. Anyway, wrong-o. A while later, a guy walks in, and he's from transportation. "Oh, I'm supposed to pick somebody up here and take them over to the hospital." So I hobble out to the van, at a big white van, and I climb in the seat on the passenger side. And he drives me over to wherever the hospital is that's there. And I get out of the van, I start walking in, and people looked at me, as I'm going in this emergency room. And it's like, "What the heck happened to you?" And all of a sudden, I said, "Well, I was in a fire at the shipyard and I inhaled it." All of a sudden, there's people all over me. They put me on a gurney. They're rolling me down a hall, took me in some room, and start cutting my clothes off. And I'm thinking, well, what am I going to wear home? Anyway, to make even a longer story short, I ended up spending the night in the hospital. I didn't like it because they woke me up constantly to take blood. Finally, they said I could go home. And so I took advantage of it. They let me take a shower about 11 o'clock in the morning, and they released me maybe at noon or 1 o'clock. And finally, I was out of there. And of course, Grandma had no idea what was going on. Somewhere along the line, about 12:30, 1 o'clock, they let me call her and tell her I wasn't going to be home, because remember, I was working night shift, and normally I'd get home at 12:30, 1 o'clock. So I called her and I just told her, there was an incident and I'm at the medical center. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. And so as far as she was concerned, I had cut my finger or smashed my toe. Anyway, gonna cut it off there. I'll finish up the story when I get back. I spent the night in the hospital, and I was prodded all night long by people taking blood to check the toxin levels in my blood. As morning started to break, I really wanted to take a shower, because if you recall, I had been covered with soot, and although I had washed a lot of it off with paper towels they had in the bathroom, I really wanted to clean up a little bit. And of course they wouldn't let me get out of bed or do anything until the doctor came in, so I kept asking every once in a while, when's the doctor going to come in, when's the doctor going to come in. And then of course you can't get anybody when you want them, as far as nurses or anything. They come in when you're trying to sleep or you're trying to do something else, and then when you really want to ask them a question, well, they're not there to be found, which I guess is their safety net. The doctor finally shows up. I had been given permission to shower, so that was cool, about 11 o'clock, and I had been awake most of the night, so that was a treat. Doctor came in, asked me questions, blah, 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 and I wanted to go home. I didn't want to spend another night in the hospital. And the doctor finally said, well, you appear to be well enough that you can go home, and just need to monitor what's taking place with your body, and if you have problems, you need to come back in. Well, of course, my back was hurting, but they weren't going to address that. They were more concerned with my respiratory system, my lungs. And so I got to leave. However, I didn't have clothes any longer that I could wear, because they had cut them off. So they gave me some scrubs, and I was able to call the shipyard. I got transportation back. I got dropped off near my car, and as I'm getting in my car and looking forward, my car was parked, and it actually was in a position where I could see the dock that I had been on the night before that had been burning, and I could see all the people running around, a lot of white hats who are like supervisors, or they're shipbuilders, or they're people that are responsible for whatever they're responsible for that gives them a white hat. And they were probably trying to figure out still what exactly happened. And I'll try to remember to tell you what exactly happened in a couple minutes. So I get home, and of course by that time Grandma Kenna had already talked to her mom or grandma and her dad to know more about what had happened, so she wasn't any too happy or pleased with me that I hadn't shared a whole lot of the story with her. But I was hard to talk. I was pretty much naked at the time they let me go to a telephone, and I didn't really want to sit around where people would see me pretty much naked talking on the phone, and so I was pretty brief and short on that. I was off for about a week, and then I got paperwork saying that they were going to put me on disability if I needed to continue to be off. And of course the paperwork and disability says, you're going to make 80%, blah, 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 blah. And I was the sole breadwinner at the time for the family, and that wasn't really going to cut it even if they didn't take taxes. So I started working on trying to get released so I could go back to work. And it took a few days to get into medical people to get cleared. I had to pass a breathing test, which I just squeaked by on. And I think I actually failed it, but the guy that was giving it to me changed the numbers so that I could pass it. And I was cleared to go back to work. Now, I did have a sore back, and I was, assigned physical therapy or whatever else for that. And the breathing issue, I was assigned physical therapy or medical care for that to continue. But I got to go back to work, and so that was great. And we could afford the bills and pay things, and it was a tough time financially. We didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of free money, and of course, at this time, Ruthie was a month and a half old, and there's expenses with little kids that come up, and you end up having to pay all sorts of little things here and there. And I did have medical through the shipyard, so it covered doctor care at the time, but it didn't cover diapers. Back at work, all's going well, I assume, I believe. I went back, and they were having us work on that dry dock that the fire was on. And what's funny is, while we were working there trying to clean it all up, paint up sections that had charred, a fire actually broke out above on a walkway, a ramp, where someone had been smoking and throwing the cigarette instead of into a sand bucket or a smoke bucket. They had thrown it into a bucket that had some cleaning rags, and it caught on fire, and it was no big deal. I mean, it was put out in a matter of a few seconds. But for people that had been there or knew what had happened, it was kind of a frightening experience to happen so quickly after this other fire had taken place. Now, when I went back to work, there was only 2 other people that had been working on that crew that I was on that I ever saw again. So everybody else, my assumption is that they were all terminated. There were a number of other new employees that is real easy to terminate for whatever reason they come up with, and then some of the long-termers, they come up with reasons to terminate you and fire you. And so they had gotten rid of just about everybody that was working there. The 2 that were working still, one of them was a guy I had made friends with, and he had actually was one of the painters underneath and had run off and jumped into the water, and a fireboat had picked him up. So there was a record of him being involved, and so terminating him meant that there might be some legal issues. And the other fella lucked out because he had been pulled off of the crew while we were working there to go and work someplace else, do another job. And so he wasn't there right at the time of the fire. As far as I know, nobody else ended up getting severely hurt. As far as I know, I heard that a few of the people had gone to urgent care and emergency rooms on their own later on. But, nobody had the records that I had. And so because of that, I was safe. And I went back to work. About a month later, my lead man came down to me where I was working, and they had assigned me a job where I was painting all by myself in a fuel tank, and it's pretty much a lonely job. He comes down and he says, "You're going to be terminated. You need to go to the paint shop." And I'm just aghast. I'm going to be terminated. That means I'm being fired. It's like, oh my gosh. Why? Oh, I was just was distraught. I was upset. I was whatever words you can come up with. So I climb out of this hole and I get all the stuff, and he said, don't worry about all the paint gear, I'll take care of it. You just need to go to the paint shed or the paint shop. And standing there are 2 security guards. So they let me lead the way to the paint shed, or the paint shop. They call it the shed, I don't know why. So I get to the paint shop, and here's my favorite quarterman sitting there, and he's like, I got papers for you to sign, you're being terminated for blah blah blah. And I said, well, why am I being terminated? Well, I don't know, you're just being terminated. You'll have to call and talk to the foreman on that one. So you don't know why they're firing me, terminating me. Blah 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 blah. So I sign my papers. The security guards walk with me to clear out my locker. And once that's done and I turn in whatever equipment I had, they walk me to the gate and say, so long. Well, they didn't say so long, but basically that was the idea. And so I was pretty much devastated. I had to go home now and tell my wife I had been fired and that there was nobody making money right now to pay bills. And of course, Grandma, that's an important thing for her. You know, she just was going to die. I was terminated. My life changed again. I was distraught. I had another job within a day or so. That wasn't that hard to do, to get a job. I was a mechanic, so I could get a job as an auto mechanic, and that's what I ended up doing. After I was terminated, I tried to find a job here and a job there. I eventually ended up working for a Shell service station for a number of months as a mechanic, and then it was at that time that I got a call out of the blue from somebody. Said they had a job opening in Redlands, California for a shop teacher. Was I interested? I said I might be interested, but I hadn't finished my teaching credential work. And so I went for the interview because they had told me that oftentimes they can work something out with a university and get an emergency credential. And so I went for the interview, was offered the job in Redlands. I then contacted University of California at Irvine because they had a program where they did emergency credentials for teachers that didn't have all of their credential work finished. And so I contacted them, and within an hour or two I had all of that taken care of. And so I was ready to start the next phase of my life. And again, I had to quit a job because this was a few days before school started that I was offered the job because they were desperate to fill it. And I was fortunate. I took the job, and of course I had to quit. And the people where I quit working at the Shell station weren't exactly thrilled with me because I did a lot of work there, and that meant they were going to be short-handed. But I had to move on with my life and try to do something that I thought had a better potential long run for me, for my family especially. And so that's what I did. I started teaching in Redlands, and 40 years later I retired. And it was a great experience, a lot of it. There was a lot of learning, a lot of work that went into teaching, but I did it, and at this end of life, it was a good choice. And at this end of life, I can look back and I can look at all the things that took place, and I can see where blessings came and where God worked in my life. It's amazing. I ended up going from one job to another job as a painter. I ended up getting fired there, and it was absolutely, it was a super depressing thing to lose a job. I'd never been fired before. And, to believe that you're working and doing as well as you can and as well as anybody else, and to lose a job, that was really, really tough. That was hard to take. And so as I went on and I got another job, and then I finally ended up at the Shell service station, which was a decent job. A lot of hours. It was 5 or 6 days a week. It was a lot of work, but it was decent pay, enough to help with all of the bills that there were. But as I look back, I can see where the hand of God was in my life. Had it not been for a fire, had it not been that I was fired basically as a result of that fire, had it not been that out of the blue I got a call, had it not been that I jumped in the car the next day and drove to Redlands, where I'd never been before, and was interviewed, had all of these things not happened and taken place, the next 40 years of my life would have been much different. So we don't see things when we're there right at the moment of what can be. And God leads in our lives, and He makes things happen, and He works in our lives. And a lot of times we won't see it, and we won't see it for a long, long, long time, if we see it at all. Because there's things that happens in our lives, blessings we will never know. But there was a blessing there. And it was hard to look at getting fired as a blessing. It was hard to look at getting injured, getting hurt in a fire as a blessing. But it was a result of that led to eventually me getting fired, because they wanted to get rid of everybody. When I went back to work after the fire, and I was off for about a week, when I went back to work, of all the people that were on the crew, only 2 other people were there. And one of them had been picked up by a fireboat because he had jumped off the end of the dock, and a fireboat had picked him up in the water. Everybody else in that crew I never saw again when I went back and worked the rest of that month. Never saw them again. I don't know what happened to them. I was the only person that ended up going to the hospital that night. All of that working together, all of those things that happened that you could say, gosh, you were in a fire. Gosh, you almost died. Gosh, you got fired. Well, all of those things worked together to bring about something that took place that was a blessing. And it's incredible, because God does watch over us. God does take care of us. God does lead in our lives, and God does care what happens to us. And sometimes it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes it takes time to get to that point where His blessings can be fulfilled. God blessed me, and I was very fortunate that He did, and He continues to bless me. But looking back now, I can see where His blessings have led in my life. Had I not been in all those series of events, what would life have been? So to thank God that I was in a fire, to thank God that I was fired from a job, to thank God that I didn't want to work for Shell service station as a mechanic for the rest of my life, you know, to thank God for all of those things. I mean, were those the blessings in life that you look at as being a blessing? Well, we don't look at negative things as being a blessing, but in reality, in life, things work out for us because God works in our lives. That night on the dry dock, we were painting, and there were 2 teams, I believe, maybe 3, down underneath, spraying the underside and sides of the barge. We were using a paint that was designed to prevent crustaceans from grabbing onto it, and so it was somewhat poisonous, like an insecticide paint. And the paint was thick, even when mixed with thinner, and so you had to run a high amount of pressure, which meant that the spray nozzle that you were using really jerked a lot when you would grab the handle and trigger. And so you had somebody that was holding the hose. It was a hose tender, and that person's job was simply to hold the hose so that when the person was spraying, they didn't have to try to drag or maintain control over the whole hose, because the hoses were 100 feet long or more. So it made it difficult for the guy with the gun in his hand to keep pulling the hose. No, you needed somebody to help you. Anyway, what happened? A fellow was painting underneath with his hose tender, and he wanted to move a little bit. So he jerks the gun and the hose, and the hose tender gets kind of irritated by the jerk, and so he jerks the hose back. Well, as he jerks the hose back, the spray gun slips out of the painter's hand, and the spray starts shooting all over before the nozzle shuts down. Well, the spray shot onto a mercury vapor lamp, which is about 350 degrees. In fact, you could cook on it. You could put your TV dinner on it and heat it up. So the spray hit that light and ignited. And then, of course, it ignites the paint that he sprayed on the bottom of the barge. And so now we have paint burning on the bottom of the barge. And they had been spraying a lot of paint, so now we got lots of paints burning on the bottom of the barge. And then, of course, anything else that's close to it, it's going to catch on fire. Because when you're spray painting, you have a spray of mist. And so that mist is floating around, and it's... So all of those guys underneath, they survived, and they got off one way or the other. Ran one direction, ran another direction. Most of them were able to run back to the dock side, and like I said, one of them jumped in the water. I don't know if more did, but the one guy I know did, because I talked to him after the fact.